Mississippi, 1856. The Blackwood plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of the richest soil in the South. Cotton fields rolled like white oceans under the brutal summer sun, and the big house stood at the center of it all, 3 stories of white columns and verandas, a monument to wealth built on human suffering. In the kitchen house behind the mansion, 17-year-old Eliza worked in silence. Her hands moved quickly, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. She had been born on this plantation, the daughter of the head cook, and she had learned early to keep her eyes down and her thoughts hidden. But today, her hands were shaking. "You hear what Massa said," whispered Clara, the older woman who worked beside her, "about you and his son." Eliza didn't answer. She had heard. Everyone in the quarters had heard. Master Jonathan Blackwood had announced that his only son, William, would be married in 2 weeks. The bride would be Eliza. It wasn't a request, it wasn't an honor, it was an order. William Blackwood was 22 years old, educated in Charleston, handsome in the way that cruel men often are. He had returned from university 3 months ago, expecting to take over management of the plantation from his aging father. But William had a problem that everyone whispered about but no one dared speak aloud. He couldn't control his temper, he drank too much, and he had already fathered 2 children by enslaved women on the property. Children he refused to acknowledge, women he discarded like broken tools. Now Master Blackwood wanted his son married properly, with witnesses and a ceremony. But no respectable white family would give their daughter to William. His reputation had preceded him. So Master Blackwood had decided on a different solution. He would marry his son to a slave girl, someone young and pretty enough to satisfy William's appetites, but powerless enough that she could never leave, never complain, never ruin the family name with scandal. Someone like Eliza. That evening, Eliza was called to the big house. She walked across the yard with her mother beside her, both of them silent, both knowing what was coming. Master Blackwood sat in his study, a glass of bourbon in his hand. William stood by the window, not even looking at her. "Eliza," Master Blackwood said, his voice friendly like they were discussing the weather, "I have good news. You're going to be married to my son." Eliza kept her eyes on the floor. "Yes, sir." "This is an honor, girl. You understand that. Not every slave gets to live in the big house to be part of the family." She wasn't part of the family, she would still be property, but Eliza said nothing. "The ceremony will be next Saturday. We'll have the Reverend come from town, make it official. You'll move into William's rooms, tend to his needs, bear his children. You'll have a better life than those field hands outside." A better life. As if being forced to share a bed with a man she'd never chosen, bearing children who would be born into slavery, was a gift. "Yes, sir," Eliza said again, because there was nothing else to say. William finally turned from the window. He looked at Eliza like she was a horse he was considering purchasing. "She's skinny. Can she even bear children?" "She's young and healthy," Master Blackwood said. "Her mother's had 8 children, all survived. Good breeding stock." They were talking about her like she wasn't there, like she couldn't hear them discussing her body, her future, her whole life as if it belonged to them. Which legally it did. "Fine," William said carelessly. "Whatever you want, Father, can I go now?" "One more thing," Master Blackwood's voice hardened. "You will treat this girl properly. No beating her where it shows, no selling off her children. I want grandchildren, legitimate heirs who can inherit this plantation without legal complications. Do you understand me?" William's jaw clenched. "You're asking me to treat a slave like a wife." "I'm telling you to treat her well enough that she survives and gives me grandsons. What you do beyond that is your business." Eliza's mother made a small sound beside her, quickly suppressed. But Eliza heard it, the grief, the helplessness, the rage that had nowhere to go. They were dismissed. As they walked back to the quarters, Eliza's mother finally spoke. "Baby, I'm so sorry. if there was any way to stop this. There isn't, Eliza interrupted. We both know there isn't. Maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe William will be kind, maybe. Mama, stop. Eliza's voice was flat. We both know what he is. We both know what's going to happen. Her mother was crying now, quietly, the tears running down her face. I tried to raise you strong. I tried to teach you how to survive. But this. Eliza took her mother's hand. You taught me more than you know. That night, alone in the small cabin she shared with her mother and siblings, Eliza lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about running. The North was far away, but people made it sometimes. There were routes, safe houses, conductors on the underground railroad who helped escapees. But running meant leaving her mother, her younger brothers and sisters, everyone she loved. And if she was caught, when she was caught, because most runners were, the punishment would be horrific. Whipping, branding, being sold to the deep South where the sugar plantations killed workers within 5 years. She thought about refusing, simply saying no, accepting whatever punishment came. But that would accomplish nothing except getting her beaten or killed. William would just choose another girl, and the cycle would continue. No, if she was going to survive this, she needed to be smart. She needed to endure, to watch, to wait for an opportunity. And most importantly, she needed to learn. The next morning, Eliza sought out old Betty, the plantation's herb woman. Betty was nearly 70, small and bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and she knew things others didn't. Betty lived in a cabin at the edge of the quarters, surrounded by plants she grew in careful rows. Herbs for cooking, for healing, for other purposes she never discussed openly. Child, Betty said when Eliza appeared at her door, I heard about you and Massa William. I'm sorry. I need to learn, Eliza said without preamble, about plants, about healing, about everything you know. Betty studied her for a long moment. What you planning, girl? Surviving, that's all. But if I'm going to live in that house, I need to know things. How to help him sleep when he's drunk, how to calm his temper, how to keep myself alive. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't entirely the truth either. Betty seemed to understand both what Eliza said and what she didn't say. Come back tonight after dark. I'll teach you what I can. But girl, be careful. Some knowledge is dangerous. All knowledge is dangerous, Eliza replied. That's why they don't want us to have it. That week, Eliza visited Betty every night. She learned which herbs helped people sleep: valerian root, chamomile, lavender. She learned which plants eased pain: willow bark, feverfew. She learned about dosages, about how much was healing and how much was harmful. And she learned about other plants, ones that grew in the woods beyond the fields, ones that could cause illness, confusion, death if used improperly. Some folks might use this knowledge for evil, Betty said one night, holding up a dried root. But that's not why I'm teaching you. I'm teaching you because knowledge is power, and you're going to need all the power you can get. Eliza memorized everything. The names, the properties, the preparations. She was a quick study. Her mother had taught her to read in secret, risking severe punishment, because her mother believed education was the only weapon the powerless had. Now Eliza understood why. The wedding day arrived too quickly. The ceremony was held in the plantation's chapel, a small building where the enslaved people were allowed to worship on Sundays, supervised by an overseer to make sure they didn't preach rebellion. Eliza wore a dress that had belonged to William's late mother, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. She stood beside William in front of Reverend Mitchell, who had traveled from town and was being paid handsomely to perform this irregular ceremony. The Reverend's sermon was about duty and obedience, about how wives should submit to their husbands, and how the natural order placed some people above others. He quoted scripture selectively, using the Bible to justify slavery and oppression. Eliza barely heard him. She was thinking about the small cloth bag tucked into her dress pocket, herbs Betty had given her for the wedding night. Some to dull pain, some to prevent pregnancy, some for other purposes Betty hadn't specified. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend said. William kissed her roughly, his hand gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. The small crowd of white guests applauded politely. The enslaved witnesses watched in silence, their faces carefully neutral. Eliza was now, legally, William Blackwood's wife in the eyes of the church. But in the eyes of the law, she was still his property. The marriage gave her no rights, no protection, no voice. That night, in William's bedroom in the big house, Eliza learned what her life would be. He was drunk, as he often was. He was rough, as she had expected. He cared nothing for her pain or fear or humanity. When he was finished, he rolled over and fell asleep immediately, leaving her bleeding and crying silently in the darkness. But through the pain, through the violation, Eliza's mind stayed clear. She watched everything: the bottle of bourbon he kept by the bed, the way he slept so heavily when drunk, the fact that he didn't lock the bedroom door because who would dare enter? She memorized the layout of the room, the house, the routines, where William kept his pistol, where Master Blackwood kept the plantation's financial records, where the mistress kept her jewelry. She watched and she waited and she learned. 3 months passed. Eliza performed her duties as William's wife while quietly gathering information. She had access now to parts of the house she'd never seen as a kitchen worker. She observed dinner conversations between Master Blackwood and his guests. She overheard business discussions about cotton prices and slave trading. And she discovered something interesting. The Blackwood family was in financial trouble. Master Blackwood had borrowed heavily to expand the plantation, gambling that cotton prices would stay high. But a financial panic in 1857 had crashed prices. The plantation was hemorrhaging money, and creditors were circling. Master Blackwood was desperate. He was considering selling some of his slaves to pay debts, breaking up families, destroying lives to maintain his lifestyle. Eliza also learned something else. William's temper was getting worse. He beat her regularly now, careful to hit her where the bruises wouldn't show when she wore long sleeves. He had gotten 2 more enslaved women pregnant and was talking about selling their bobbies once they were born. And he was planning something with his father, something involving selling off half the plantation's workforce and using the money to invest in a new venture. Eliza realized with cold clarity that everyone on this plantation was in danger. Not just her, but her mother, her siblings, everyone she knew. Master Blackwood would sacrifice them all to save himself. That night, after William passed out drunk as usual, Eliza made a decision. She had tried to survive by submission. She had tried to be invisible, to endure. But submission had only taught William that he could hurt her without consequence. Invisibility had only made her powerless. It was time to try something else. The next day, Eliza asked Betty to teach her about one specific plant, one that grew deep in the woods, that had to be prepared carefully, that was dangerous in the wrong hands. Betty looked at her for a long time without speaking. "You sure about this path, child? Once you walk down it, there's no going back." "I'm already on that path," Eliza said. "I just need to know where it leads." Betty sighed. "Then come with me, we got a lot of work to do." Over the following weeks, Betty taught Eliza everything she knew about toxic plants. Not to use them, Betty was careful about that, but to understand them, to recognize them, to know what they could do. Just knowledge, just information. What Eliza did with that knowledge would be her own choice. And Eliza was tired of being powerless. She was tired of being property. She was tired of watching William hurt people and face no consequences. She was tired of watching Master Blackwood destroy families to pay his gambling debts. She was tired of living in fear. So when William demanded she prepare his evening bourbon one night in late October, Eliza didn't hesitate. She went to the library where the drinks were kept, and she prepared his whiskey exactly the way he liked it. And then she added something extra. Just a small amount, just enough to make him sick, not enough to kill him, not yet. She needed to test to learn to see if she could do this without being caught. William drank the bourbon and felt ill an hour later. He vomited, complained of stomach pains, then recovered by morning. He blamed it on bad food and beat the cook. Eliza watched and learned. She could do this, she could strike back, she could make them pay. But she needed to be careful, she needed to be patient, she needed to plan. Because what she was planning wasn't just revenge. It was justice. And she would make sure everyone in the Blackwood household understood what they had created when they took a powerless girl and pushed her too far. The next phase of her plan would require help. She couldn't do this alone. It was time to talk to her mother, to Betty, to the others who had suffered under the Blackwoods for too long. It was time to build something that had been brewing in the fields and quarters for generations. It was time for the powerless to take their power back. Winter settled over the plantation like a cold blanket. The cotton had been harvested and sold at prices lower than Master Blackwood had hoped. His creditors were getting more aggressive with their demands. The tension in the big house was thick enough to taste. Eliza moved through it all like a shadow, watching and waiting. She had stopped adding anything to William's drinks after that first test. It was too risky to continue, and she needed more information before acting. But the knowledge that she could hurt him, that she had that power even if she chose not to use it yet, gave her a sense of control she hadn't felt in months. One December evening, William came home from town angrier than Eliza had ever seen him. He'd been drinking at the tavern, gambling with plantation owners' sons, and he'd lost badly. He stormed into their bedroom and immediately started shouting at Eliza about nothing. The curtains weren't drawn properly. His clothes hadn't been laid out correctly. She was worthless and stupid, and he should have chosen a different girl. Then he hit her, not a slap but a closed fist to her face that sent her sprawling. "Get up," he snarled. "I'm not done with you." But Eliza didn't get up immediately. She touched her face, felt blood from her split lip, and something inside her crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. This would be the last time William Blackwood hurt her, the last time he hurt anyone. She would make sure of it. "I said get up." Eliza rose slowly, keeping her eyes down as she'd been trained, but her mind was racing. She needed to accelerate her plans. She needed to act soon, before William's violence escalated to something she couldn't recover from. That night, after William passed out drunk as usual, Eliza slipped out of the big house. She made her way to the quarters, moving silently through the cold darkness. She found her mother in the cabin, awake and mending clothes by candlelight. The moment her mother saw Eliza's face, saw the bruises and the split lip, her expression hardened. "Mama," Eliza whispered, "I need your help, and I need you to trust me, even when what I'm asking sounds impossible." Her mother set down her sewing. "What are you planning, baby?" Eliza told her, not everything. Some things were too dangerous to speak aloud, but enough. She told her about the Blackwoods' financial troubles, about Master Blackwood's plan to sell half the plantation's workforce, about William's increasing violence. "We're all in danger," Eliza said, "all of us, and no one's coming to save us, so we need to save ourselves." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you need?" "I need to know who I can trust, who's strong enough to do hard things, who's tired enough of living like this that they'll take risks." Her mother nodded slowly. "I'll make a list, but Eliza, whatever you're planning, it's dangerous if you're caught." "I know, but Mama, what's more dangerous? Trying to change things or staying like this until Master Blackwood sells you and the children away to pay his debts?" Her mother's face went pale. "He wouldn't, would he?" "He's already discussing it with William. I heard them. They're planning to sell 20 people in the spring. You, the twins, Uncle Solomon, anyone who will bring good money." Her mother's hands clenched. That devil. "So will you help me?" Her mother looked at her daughter, 17 years old, bruised and battered but unbowed, and made her decision. "I'll help. God forgive me, I'll help." Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza quietly assembled a group. Her mother brought in people who could be trusted. Old Betty, who knew plants and poisons. Solomon, Eliza's uncle, who was strong and smart and had been planning his own escape for years. Clara and Ruth from the kitchen house, who had access to the family's food. And 3 field workers who had lost children to being sold away and had nothing left to lose. 9 people total. 9 lives that had been broken and discarded by the Blackwood family. 9 people who were ready to risk everything for a chance at freedom. They met in Betty's cabin late at night, speaking in whispers. "What exactly are you proposing?" Solomon asked Eliza. She took a deep breath. "I'm proposing we destroy the Blackwoods completely. Not just kill them, though that might be part of it, but destroy their wealth, their reputation, their power. Make sure they can never hurt anyone again." "You talking about murder?" one of the field workers said nervously. "I'm talking about justice," Eliza corrected. "They've murdered us slowly for years, worked us to death, beaten us, sold our children, raped our daughters. When does that count as murder?" The room was silent. "But here's the thing," Eliza continued. "If we just kill them and run, we'll be caught and hanged. Every slave in Mississippi will be punished as a warning. So we need to be smarter. We need to make it look like an accident. And we need to make sure that when we're done, we have the resources to actually escape and build new lives." "How?" Betty asked. Eliza pulled out papers she'd stolen from Master Blackwood's study. "These are the plantation's financial records. I've been studying them. The Blackwoods are broke. They owe money to banks in 3 states, but they have one asset left that's worth a fortune, the plantation itself and the slaves on it." She spread the papers on the floor. "If Master Blackwood and William both die, the plantation goes to William's sister, who lives in Charleston and wants nothing to do with running a farm. She'll sell everything immediately, probably to the bank that holds the biggest loan." "How does that help us?" Solomon asked. "Because chaos creates opportunities. When the Blackwoods die and the estate falls apart, there will be confusion. Lawyers fighting over assets, creditors fighting over debts. In that confusion, people can disappear, records can be lost, and money can be redirected." Clara leaned forward. "You want to steal from them?" "I want to take what we're owed. Years of labor unpaid. Our own bodies and lives that they stole. We're just collecting our debt." "How much money are we talking about?" Ruth asked. "Master Blackwood keeps about $2,000 in gold hidden in his study. He doesn't trust banks anymore after the panic. That's $200 per person if we split it evenly, enough to start over up north." $200 was more money than any of them would earn in a lifetime of slavery. It was freedom money, life-changing money. "And the Blackwoods?" Solomon asked. How do we deal with them?" This was the hard part, the part that made Eliza's stomach turn even as she knew it was necessary. "There's an illness going around," she said carefully. "Food poisoning, bad water, it happens. Sometimes whole families get sick and die, tragic but natural." Betty caught on immediately. "You talking about poison?" "I'm talking about justice that looks like misfortune." The room was quiet again. What Eliza was proposing wasn't just murder. It was calculated, premeditated killing. It went against everything they'd been taught about right and wrong, about turning the other cheek, about suffering in this life and finding reward in the next. But it was also the only way they would ever be free. "I won't force anyone to participate," Eliza said. "If you want to walk away right now, no one will judge you, but I need to know who's with me." Her mother raised her hand first, then Betty, then Solomon. One by one, all 9 people in the room committed themselves to the plan. "When?" Solomon asked. "Christmas," Eliza said. "Master Blackwood is hosting a big dinner. All the important families from the county will be here. If something happens that night, if the family gets sick, it'll be written off as bad food at the party. No one will suspect deliberate poisoning." "That's only 2 weeks away," Clara said. "I know, but Master Blackwood plans to sell people in January. If we wait longer, some of you might not be here anymore." The reality of that statement settled over the group. "What do you need us to do?" Ruth asked. Eliza outlined the plan. It was complex, with multiple steps and backup plans. Everyone had a role. Clara and Ruth would help prepare the food for the Christmas dinner. Betty would provide the poison, nothing exotic, just a large dose of something that occurred naturally and would look like food contamination. Eliza would make sure the family ate it. Solomon and the others would be ready to create distractions if needed. And afterward, in the chaos and grief, they would take the gold from Master Blackwood's study and disappear into the night. "What about the other slaves?" Betty asked. "The ones who aren't in on this, they'll be questioned, maybe punished." "That's why we have to make it look completely natural," Eliza said. "Food poisoning at a dinner party. The family eats first, gets the bad portions. By the time anyone realizes something's wrong, they'll be too sick to investigate properly. And we make sure suspicion falls on the caterer from town who brought the oysters, not on anyone from the plantation." It wasn't perfect. There were 100 ways it could go wrong, but it was a chance. The next 2 weeks were agony. Eliza continued her duties as William's wife, enduring his violence and his demands while secretly preparing for his death. She felt like 2 people, the submissive, frightened girl she pretended to be, and the cold, calculating woman she was becoming. She wondered if what she was planning made her evil, if choosing to kill made her as bad as the people who had enslaved her. But then William would hit her, or she'd hear Master Blackwood casually discussing selling children away from their mothers, and her doubts would disappear. Evil wasn't what she was planning. Evil was what had been done to her and her people for generations. She was just the response to that evil. She was the reckoning. 3 days before Christmas, Eliza went to Betty's cabin for the final preparations. "You sure about this?" Betty asked, holding up a small jar of white powder. "Once you use this, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Betty handed over the jar. "This is concentrated foxglove mixed with water hemlock extract. A teaspoon of this in a sauce or gravy. It'll cause heart failure that looks like natural causes. Symptoms start within an hour: nausea, confusion, irregular heartbeat. Death follows within 3 to 6 hours. Eliza held the jar carefully. "How much for one person?" "Half a teaspoon. But if you're doing this, do it right. Either use enough for everyone or don't do it at all. Partial measures just create witnesses." Eliza understood. The plan wasn't just to kill William or just Master Blackwood. It was to eliminate the entire family so there would be no one left to seek revenge or investigate too closely. Master Blackwood, his wife, William's younger sister who was visiting for the holidays. 4 people, 4 lives she would end. "Can you live with this?" Betty asked gently. "Because once it's done, you can't undo it. The weight of those deaths will stay with you forever." "The weight of what they've done to us has stayed with me my whole life," Eliza replied. "I'll take their deaths over our continued suffering." Betty nodded sadly. "Then God help us all." Christmas Eve arrived. The big house was decorated with pine boughs and candles. Guests began arriving in carriages, wealthy families from across the county, dressed in their finest clothes, coming to celebrate the holiday with the Blackwoods. Eliza watched from the kitchen as Clara and Ruth prepared the feast. Roasted turkey, ham, oysters brought from the coast, vegetables, sauces, pies. Enough food to feed 50 people. The plan was to poison only the family's portions. the sauce that would go on their meat, the gravy for their potatoes, specific dishes that would be served only to the Blackwoods while their guests received untainted food. At 6 o'clock, the dinner bell rang. Guests assembled in the dining room. The Blackwood family took their places at the head of the long table, Master Blackwood at one end, his wife at the other, William and his sister in the middle. Eliza stood against the wall with the other house servants, ready to serve. Clara brought out the first course. Eliza watched as Master Blackwood's special gravy was poured over his turkey, as William's sauce was applied to his ham, as the dishes of death were placed before each family member. "To family," Master Blackwood said, raising his glass. "To prosperity in the new year, to God's blessings on this household." The guests echoed the toast. The Blackwoods began to eat. Eliza felt her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment everything changed. She watched William take his first bite, saw him chew, swallow, reach for his wine. Nothing happened immediately. The dinner continued, conversation and laughter, guests enjoying their food, oblivious to what was happening. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Eliza began to worry. Had Betty miscalculated the dose? Had the poison lost its potency? Was this all for nothing? Then William's fork clattered to his plate. "Father," he said, his voice strained, "I don't feel well." Master Blackwood looked up, annoyed. "You're probably drunk again, boy." "No, I'm serious. My heart, something's wrong." Master Blackwood opened his mouth to reply, then stopped. His face had gone pale. I feel strange too." Within minutes, all 4 members of the Blackwood family were showing symptoms: nausea, confusion, difficulty breathing. Their guests watched in alarm as the family began to deteriorate. "Send for the doctor," someone shouted. "Get them upstairs to bed." Chaos erupted. Servants rushed to help the stricken family members to their rooms. Guests milled about in confusion. The carefully planned Christmas dinner dissolved into panic. Eliza helped carry William upstairs. His body was trembling, his skin clammy with sweat. He looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Help me," he gasped. "Please, Eliza, I'm dying." For just a moment, Eliza felt something that might have been pity. William was 22 years old, terrified, begging for mercy. Then she remembered every bruise he'd given her, every time he'd forced himself on her, every cruel word and casual violence. "Yes," she said quietly, "you are." She left him in his room, closing the door on his suffering, and went downstairs where the real work was about to begin. The doctor arrived within an hour, riding hard from town. He was a thin man in his 50s named Dr. Harrison, who had been treating the Blackwoods for 20 years. He examined each family member quickly, his face growing more grave with each patient. Master Blackwood was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. His wife was vomiting violently. William's heart was racing erratically. His sister had collapsed completely. "What did they eat?" Dr. Harrison demanded, turning to the gathered servants and guests. "The same as everyone else," one guest said. "Turkey, ham, vegetables. We all had the same meal." "Then why is only the family sick?" The doctor's eyes narrowed. "Something's not right here." Eliza felt ice in her stomach. The doctor was too smart, asking too many questions. Clara stepped forward nervously. "Doctor, sir, the family had special sauces, made separate with ingredients brought in from town. The oysters, sir, they might have been bad." The doctor seized on this explanation. "Oysters, yes, that could cause this. Food poisoning from contaminated shellfish." He looked around at the worried faces. "It's serious, but if we can get them through the night, they might recover. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and everyone stay calm." But Eliza knew they wouldn't recover. Betty's poison had been carefully calculated. The symptoms would worsen over the next few hours until their hearts simply stopped. The guests were ushered out, sent home with apologies and explanations. The plantation settled into a tense vigil. Dr. Harrison worked through the night trying everything he knew: medicines to calm the stomach, herbs to steady the heart, cool cloths to bring down the fever. Nothing worked. At 3 a.m, William's sister died first. She was only 19, visiting from boarding school for the holidays. She had been kind to the house servants, sometimes slipping them extra food or defending them from William's cruelty. Eliza felt a stab of guilt as the girl's death was announced. She hadn't deserved this. But there was no way to save some and not others. Betty had been right. Partial measures just created witnesses. An hour later, Mrs. Blackwood followed her daughter. She died gasping for breath, calling for her husband who was too far gone to hear her. Master Blackwood died at dawn. The man who had owned hundreds of human beings, who had built his wealth on suffering and exploitation, died in his bed, surrounded by servants he had never seen as fully human. His last words were about cotton prices. William lasted the longest, fighting the poison until mid-morning. Eliza sat with him at the end as a wife should. He was too weak to speak, but his eyes followed her movements. She wondered if he understood in those final moments, if he realized she had done this, if he knew that the powerless slave girl he had beaten and raped had been his executioner. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," she whispered to him, and she meant it. Not sorry for killing him, she would do that again in a heartbeat, but sorry that the world was such that this had been the only path to freedom. William's eyes closed, his breathing stopped. Eliza waited a moment, then stood and went to find Dr. Harrison. "He's gone," she said quietly. The doctor slumped in his chair, exhausted and defeated. "All of them, the whole family, God help us." "What was it, doctor?" Eliza asked. "What killed them?" "Food poisoning, most likely. The oysters or something in the sauces. I've seen it before, though never this severe." He rubbed his face. "There will have to be an investigation. The sheriff will want to know exactly what they ate, where the food came from." "Of course, sir. We'll help however we can." But Eliza knew the investigation would find nothing. The caterer who had brought the oysters was a real person who would confirm he delivered fresh shellfish. The sauces had been made by Clara and Ruth, but they would say they'd followed the family's usual recipes exactly. Any poison would have been metabolized by now, leaving only symptoms consistent with severe food contamination. The doctor left to file his report. The house fell into shocked silence. Eliza found Solomon in the quarters. "It's done. All 4 of them are dead." Solomon nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now we wait. The sister in Charleston will be notified. She'll come to settle the estate, which will take time. The sheriff will investigate. In all that chaos, people will be focused on legal matters and blame, not on watching the slaves too carefully." "When do we take the gold?" "Tonight, before anyone thinks to secure the study, while everyone's still in shock." That evening, while the household was consumed with preparing bodies for burial and sending messages to relatives, Eliza and Solomon slipped into Master Blackwood's study. The hidden safe was behind a painting of a ship. Ironic, given how many people had been transported in chains across the ocean to build the Blackwood fortune. Eliza had watched Master Blackwood open the safe dozens of times. She knew the combination. Inside was exactly what she had expected: $2,000 in gold coins, property deeds, bills of sale for slaves, and other documents. Eliza took the gold but left everything else. She didn't want the property deeds. Those represented ownership of human beings and land stolen from native people. She just wanted what was owed: payment for years of stolen labor. She and Solomon divided the gold into small bags that could be hidden easily. $200 each for the 9 conspirators, enough to start new lives far from Mississippi. "What about the others?" Solomon asked. "The slaves who weren't part of this, what happens to them?" "The estate will be sold. They'll probably be bought by other plantation owners in the area. It's not freedom, but at least they won't be sold away to the deep south like Master Blackwood was planning. It wasn't a perfect solution. Eliza wished she could free everyone, but saving 9 lives was better than saving none. Over the next week, the plantation descended into chaos exactly as Eliza had predicted. William's sister arrived from Charleston, horrified by the deaths and overwhelmed by the responsibility of managing the estate. Lawyers appeared to contest the will. Creditors demanded payment of debts. The sheriff investigated the deaths thoroughly but found exactly what Dr. Harrison had reported: a tragic case of food poisoning from contaminated seafood. The caterer was questioned but cleared of wrongdoing. No one suspected murder because why would they? Slaves killing their masters was unthinkable, and besides, what motive would they have? The Blackwoods had been good masters, hadn't they? In the confusion, people began to disappear. First Solomon, who simply didn't show up for work one morning. Then Ruth, who claimed she was visiting a sick relative and never returned. One by one, the 9 conspirators slipped away, heading north toward freedom. Eliza was the last to go. She wanted to make sure her mother and younger siblings were safe first. She convinced William's sister to include them in a sale to a plantation owner in town, a man known for being less cruel than most. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. "Why can't we go with you?" her youngest brother asked, crying. "Because the journey is too dangerous for children," Eliza lied. The truth was that she couldn't risk bringing them. If she was caught, they would be punished too. This way, they had a chance at life, even if it was a life in bondage. "I'll come back for you," she promised, knowing it might be a promise she couldn't keep. "When I'm settled up north, when I have money and freedom, I'll come back." Her mother understood what Eliza wasn't saying. "Go, baby, live free, that's enough, that's everything." They embraced for what might be the last time. 3 weeks after the Blackwood family's death, on a cold February night, Eliza walked away from the plantation where she had been born. She carried a small bag with her share of the gold, a few clothes, and the knowledge Betty had taught her about plants and survival. She wore boys' clothes to avoid attention, her hair cut short and hidden under a cap. The journey north took 3 months. She traveled mostly at night, following routes established by the Underground Railroad. She stayed in safe houses run by abolitionists, both black and white people who risked everything to help escapees. She crossed from Mississippi to Tennessee, then Kentucky, then finally into Ohio, a free state. The day she crossed the Ohio River, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt since before her forced marriage: hope. She settled in Cincinnati, a city with a large population of free black people and former slaves. She took a room in a boarding house and found work as a seamstress, using skills her mother had taught her. She also began studying. Using the money she'd taken from the Blackwoods, she hired tutors to teach her properly. Reading, writing, mathematics, history, all the education that had been denied her. 1 year after leaving Mississippi, Eliza had built a new life. She had a small apartment, steady work, and friends in the free black community. But she hadn't forgotten her promise. She began saving money again, this time with a specific goal: to buy her mother and siblings out of slavery. It took 3 years of saving, working extra jobs, denying herself everything but basic necessities. But finally, she had enough. She contacted a lawyer who specialized in slave purchases, a complicated legal process that required negotiating with owners, verifying identities, and transferring large sums of money. The plantation owner who had bought her family was willing to sell for the right price. Eliza paid it, every penny she had saved, plus most of her original share of the Blackwood gold. In the spring of 1861, Eliza's mother and 3 younger siblings arrived in Cincinnati as free people. They cried when they saw each other. They had all thought they would never meet again. "You came back," her mother said, holding Eliza's face in her hands. "You kept your promise." I told you I would. Was it worth it? Her mother asked quietly. Everything you did, everything you sacrificed, was it worth it? Eliza thought about the question. She thought about William and his parents and sister, dead because of her actions. She thought about the weight of those deaths, which she carried every day. But she also thought about standing here now, free, with her mother beside her. She thought about her siblings who would grow up free, who would never know the whip or the auction block. Yes, she said, it was worth it. That summer, the Civil War began. The country tore itself apart over the question of slavery. Eliza watched from Cincinnati as armies clashed and the South fought desperately to maintain its way of life. She knew the war would be long and bloody. She knew that even when it ended, the fight for true equality would continue for generations. But she also knew something else. The Blackwoods and people like them were losing. Their world, built on stolen labor and human suffering, was burning down. And Eliza had helped light that fire. One person couldn't change the whole system, but one person could strike a blow for justice. One person could refuse to be powerless. One person could poison the whole household and walk away free. Years later, when the war was over and slavery was abolished, Eliza's story became part of the whispered history of the Underground Railroad. People told it in hushed voices, the story of the girl who was forced to marry her enslaver and who responded by destroying his entire family. Some people called her a hero, others called her a murderer. Eliza didn't care much about either label. She knew what she was, a survivor who had refused to die quietly. And in a world that had tried to erase her humanity, that had treated her as property, that had given her no legal recourse and no hope of justice through proper channels, she had done what was necessary to live. The Blackwoods had taught her that might makes right, that the powerful can do whatever they want to the powerless. She had simply taken that lesson to its logical conclusion. If might makes right, then those who find a way to become mighty can take what is rightfully theirs. The Blackwoods had taken her freedom, her body, her dignity. She had taken their lives and her freedom back. In her mind, it was an even trade. The years passed. Eliza built a life in Cincinnati that would have been impossible in Mississippi. She married a free man named James who had escaped slavery as a teenager. Together, they opened a small restaurant that became a gathering place for the city's black community. But Eliza never forgot where she came from or what she had done to get here. In 1863, when President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, Eliza stood in the street with hundreds of others, weeping openly as the news was read. Slavery was officially ended in the rebelling states. Her mother squeezed her hand. "You live to see it, baby, freedom." "For some," Eliza said, "the war's not over yet, and even when it is, freedom on paper isn't the same as freedom in life." She was right. The Civil War dragged on for 2 more years, brutal and devastating. When it finally ended in 1865, 4 million people were suddenly free, but with no land, no education, no resources. The period called Reconstruction began, and Eliza threw herself into helping newly freed people adjust to their new lives. She taught reading classes in her restaurant's back room. She helped people find jobs and housing. She connected families torn apart by slavery. And she told her story. Not the whole story. She never admitted to poisoning the Blackwoods, that secret she kept locked tight. But she told about being enslaved, about being forced to marry her enslaver, about finding the courage to escape. Her story inspired others. Women especially came to her, sharing their own experiences of violence and survival under slavery. "How did you bear it?" one young woman asked. "Being forced to be with him. How did you survive that?" Eliza looked at the woman, barely 18, with scars on her arms and old pain in her eyes. "I survived by remembering I was human," Eliza said. "They tried to make us believe we were property, animals, things without souls. But I knew I was a person, and I knew that what they were doing was wrong, no matter what the law said. But how did you fight back? How did you? The woman stopped, unable to finish. Eliza understood what she was really asking. How do you strike back at people with all the power? How do you hurt those who have hurt you? You find your power where you can, Eliza said carefully. Sometimes that's running away. Sometimes it's quiet resistance. Sometimes it's learning skills they think you're too stupid to learn. And sometimes, she paused, sometimes it's doing things you never thought you were capable of. The woman nodded slowly, understanding the subtext. One night in 1867, Eliza received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 30s, well-dressed, knocked on the door of the restaurant after closing. "Are you Eliza Blackwood?" the woman asked. Eliza stiffened at the name. She hadn't used it in 8 years. "I'm Eliza Morrison now. I took back my mother's maiden name when I became free." "But you were married to William Blackwood in Mississippi." "Against my will, yes. Who are you?" The woman hesitated, then said, "My name is Margaret Thornton. My husband owns a plantation in Georgia, or he did until recently. He's dead now. Food poisoning, the doctor said." Eliza felt her heart skip. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" Margaret's eyes were sharp. "Because I'm not. My husband was a monster. He beat me. He raped enslaved women on our property. He sold children away from their mothers. When he died, I felt nothing but relief." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I heard your story, about how your husband and his family died of food poisoning, about how you disappeared right after, and I started wondering, what if it wasn't an accident?" Eliza kept her face neutral. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's a question." Margaret leaned forward. "I need to know if it's possible, if someone like me with no power and no options could do what you might have done." Eliza studied the woman. She saw desperation there and determination. She saw herself 8 years ago, standing in old Betty's cabin, asking questions about poison. "Mrs. Thornton, I don't know what you're suggesting." "Please," Margaret's voice broke. "My husband is planning to sell my daughter. She's 10 years old and she's beautiful, and I know what men like him do to beautiful girls. I've been trying to leave, but he won't let me. He controls all the money, all the property. The law says I'm his property too, just like the slaves. If I run, he'll find me and kill me and take my daughter anyway." Eliza felt something crack open inside her. This woman wasn't just asking about poison. She was asking for the same thing Eliza had needed 8 years ago: knowledge, power, a way out. "I can't help you kill your husband," Eliza said carefully. "I'm not that person. But you know someone who is, or you know how. Please, I'm begging you." Eliza was silent for a long moment. What Margaret was asking was dangerous. If Eliza helped her and they were caught, both would hang. The law didn't care about justifications or desperate circumstances. But the law also didn't protect women like Margaret. It didn't protect girls like Margaret's daughter. It didn't protect anyone without power. "If someone were to do something like that," Eliza said slowly, "hypothetically, they would need to be very careful. They would need to make it look natural, and they would need to have a plan for afterward for escape." Margaret nodded eagerly. "I understand." "There are plants," Eliza continued, still speaking hypothetically, "that grow in the South. Foxglove, water hemlock, oleander. In the right doses, they cause symptoms that look like natural heart failure or food poisoning, but you would need to know exactly how to prepare them." "Could you teach me?" Eliza thought about old Betty, about the knowledge passed down through generations of enslaved women who had learned to fight back with the only weapons available to them. She thought about her mother, her siblings, all the people still living in bondage despite the Emancipation Proclamation. She thought about Margaret's 10-year-old daughter. "Yes," she said, "I can teach you." Over the next week, Eliza taught Margaret everything old Betty had taught her. Not just about poisons, but about timing, about covering tracks, about having escape routes planned. You can never tell anyone, Eliza warned. Not your daughter, not a friend, not a priest. The moment you speak it aloud, you create a witness who can testify against you. I understand. And you have to be able to live with it. Killing someone, even someone who deserves it, changes you. You carry that weight forever. Margaret's jaw set. I can live with that weight better than I can live with what he's doing to my household. She left Cincinnati with knowledge and determination. 6 months later, Eliza read in the newspaper about a prominent Georgia plantation owner who had died of apparent heart failure. His widow and daughter had moved to Boston shortly after his death. Eliza never heard from Margaret again, but she knew, and she was glad. Word began to spread, quietly, through networks of women. There was someone in Cincinnati who could teach you things, who could help you fight back against impossible situations. Eliza never advertised. She never sought out these women, but they found her anyway. A former slave whose husband was beating her children. A white woman whose father had married her off to an abusive older man. A free black woman whose employer was threatening her. One by one they came, and one by one Eliza taught them what she knew. Not all of them used the knowledge. Many just needed to know they had options, that they weren't completely powerless. The knowledge itself was a kind of freedom. But some did use it, and across the South and the border states, powerful men started dying of mysterious illnesses, heart failures, food poisoning, accidental falls. None of it could be traced back to Eliza or the women she taught. Eliza's husband James knew something of what she was doing, though they never discussed it directly. "You're building something dangerous," he said one night. "I'm giving people choices they didn't have before. What if someone gets caught? What if they tell the authorities about you?" "They won't, because they know what happens to women who talk." Eliza looked at him. "I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I'm just providing information. What they do with it is their choice." James was quiet. Then he said, "Your mother would be proud of you and terrified for you." "I'm both of those things myself." As Reconstruction continued, the political situation in the South grew more complicated. Former Confederate soldiers and supporters began organizing to resist the changes. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan terrorized black communities, trying to reimpose white supremacy through violence. Eliza watched as the promise of freedom was slowly strangled by new forms of oppression. "They're trying to recreate slavery under a different name," she said at a community meeting. "These black codes, these sharecropping contracts that keep people in debt forever, it's the same trap with different words." "What can we do?" someone asked. "Fight back, resist, don't accept their terms, and when legal resistance doesn't work," Eliza paused, choosing her words carefully, "find other ways." She began teaching more than just poison. She taught financial literacy so people wouldn't be cheated by sharecropping contracts. She taught reading and writing so people could understand legal documents. She taught history so people would know they had a heritage beyond slavery. And yes, she still taught the other things, the dangerous knowledge, the tools of last resort. Because Eliza understood something fundamental, freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the presence of power, the power to say no, the power to fight back, the power to destroy those who would destroy you. In 1870, Eliza received a letter from Old Betty. The former herb woman was nearly 80 now, still living in Mississippi, still teaching what she knew to those who asked. "Child," Betty wrote, "I heard what you're doing up north, teaching women to protect themselves, to fight back. I'm proud of you, but I'm also worried. This knowledge is powerful, and power can corrupt. Remember why we do this. Not for revenge, not for cruelty, but for survival, for freedom, for the right to live without fear. Don't let anger make you into the thing you fought against." Eliza read the letter 3 times. then burned it as Betty had surely intended. She thought about the question. Was she becoming what she had fought against? Was teaching others to kill making her a monster? But then she thought about the women who had come to her, the ones with bruises and broken bones, the ones whose children were being sold or abused, the ones who had nowhere else to turn. Was she supposed to tell them to accept their suffering, to pray and hope things got better, to trust in a legal system that had never protected them? No, she would keep teaching, keep giving people tools, keep spreading the knowledge that the powerless could become powerful if they were brave enough to act. It wasn't perfect justice, it wasn't clean or moral or righteous, but it was survival. And sometimes, survival was all you could ask for. Eliza was 40 years old when she had her first child. She and James had tried for years, and she had almost given up hope. But in 1873, their daughter Anna was born. Holding her baby, Eliza felt something shift inside her. This child would grow up free. She would never know the whip or the auction block. She would go to school, learn to read, choose her own path. What kind of world will she inherit? James asked, looking down at their daughter. A better one than we did, Eliza said, but not a perfect one. There's still so much work to do. The 1870s brought both progress and backlash. Black men could vote now, protected by the 15th Amendment. Some were elected to public office. Schools for black children opened across the South. But the resistance was fierce. The Klan and similar groups killed black voters and politicians. The federal government's commitment to protecting freedmen's rights weakened. Slowly, the gains of Reconstruction began to erode. Eliza watched with frustration as the country that had fought a war to end slavery now seemed content to let white supremacy reassert itself in new forms. "They're tired of fighting for us," she told James. "The northern whites who supported abolition, they think slavery's end was enough. They don't want to keep fighting for true equality." So what do? We keep fighting ourselves. We build our own institutions, our own communities, our own power. Eliza expanded her work. The restaurant became a community center. She started a lending library. She helped organize a mutual aid society where black families pooled resources to help each other through hard times. And she continued teaching, though more carefully now. The women who came to her seeking dangerous knowledge were screened thoroughly. Eliza couldn't risk infiltrators or people who might talk. One day in 1876, a young woman came to the restaurant. She was maybe 20, with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Mrs. Morrison, my name is Sarah. My grandmother was Ruth. She worked with you in Mississippi." Eliza's heart jumped. Ruth had been one of the conspirators, one of the 9 who had escaped north. "Is Ruth well?" Eliza asked. "She died last year, but before she passed she told me about you, about what happened at the Blackwood plantation." Sarah leaned closer. "She told me you helped people, that you taught them to fight back." "Ruth talked too much in her old age. She trusted me, and I need your help. Not for me, for my community. We're being terrorized by night riders. They've burned 3 houses and killed 2 men. The law won't protect us. We need to protect ourselves." Eliza studied the young woman. "What exactly are you asking for?" "Teach me what you taught my grandmother. Teach me how to fight back." "What you're talking about is war." "We're already at war. We just need weapons." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Was she really going to do this? Was she going to teach organized resistance, not just individual self-defense? But then she thought about the houses burned, the men killed, the communities living in terror. "I'll teach you," she said, "but not just poison. If you're going to fight, you need to fight smart. You need strategy, organization, networks." Over the next year, Eliza became something she never expected, a teacher of resistance. She brought in other former slaves who had military experience from serving in the Union Army. She connected Sarah's community with other groups facing similar terror. They didn't just learn about poisons. They learned about defensive tactics, about setting up warning systems, about creating safe houses and escape routes. Some of the night riders started dying mysteriously. Some found their horses lamed before planned attacks. Some discovered that the communities they meant to terrorize were better organized and more dangerous than expected. It wasn't enough to stop the violence entirely, but it made the terrorizers more careful, more afraid. And fear was a kind of power. As Anna grew, Eliza grappled with what to tell her daughter about her past. How do you explain to a child that her mother killed 4 people? How do you pass on that history without traumatizing her? When Anna was 10, old enough to understand some complexities, Eliza told her a simplified version. I was enslaved when I was young. I was forced to marry a man who hurt me. I escaped and came north to be free. Did you have to hurt people to escape? Anna asked. Eliza looked at her daughter's innocent face. Yes, I did things I'm not proud of, but I did them to survive. Was it wrong? Some people would say yes. The law would say yes. But Anna, sometimes the law is wrong. Sometimes the only way to survive is to break unjust laws and do hard things. How do you know when the law is wrong? When it treats people as less than human, when it protects the powerful and crushes the weak, when it calls evil good and good evil. Anna thought about this. Did you do the right thing? I did the necessary thing, whether it was right. I'm still not sure, but I'm here and you're here and we're free. That has to count for something. In 1877, Reconstruction officially ended. Federal troops withdrew from the South. The brief period of black political power and protection evaporated. Jim Crow laws began spreading, creating a new system of racial oppression. Eliza watched it happen with a mixture of rage and resignation. The country had decided that maintaining white supremacy was more important than honoring the freedom of 4 million people. They're betraying us, James said bitterly, abandoning us to the same people who enslaved us. Then we rely on ourselves, Eliza replied. We've always had to. But privately, she wondered if all the fighting, all the teaching, all the individual acts of resistance were enough. The system was so big, so entrenched. How could scattered acts of defiance compete with the organized power of white supremacy? Still, she kept working, because what else could she do? Give up, accept oppression, teach her daughter to bow her head and accept injustice? Never. In 1880, Eliza received word that the Blackwood plantation in Mississippi had been completely abandoned. The land had been foreclosed, the buildings were falling apart, the fields were overgrown. The mighty Blackwood empire, built over generations on stolen labor, had collapsed into nothing. Eliza felt a grim satisfaction. She had helped destroy that family, and now their legacy was dust. But she also felt something else, a kind of sadness, because destroying the Blackwoods hadn't ended slavery. It hadn't even ended racial oppression. One family's fall didn't change the system. Real change required more than individual acts of resistance. It required collective action, political organization, sustained struggle over generations. Eliza began shifting her focus. She put more energy into building institutions, schools, churches, mutual aid societies. She helped organize voter registration drives and economic cooperatives. She still taught the dangerous knowledge to those who needed it, but she also taught patience, strategy, long-term thinking. We're playing a long game, she told a group of young activists. Change won't come in our lifetimes, maybe not even in our children's lifetimes. But every act of resistance, every institution we build, every child we educate, it all adds up. That's not enough, one young man argued. We need revolution now. We need to burn it all down. Eliza understood his anger. She had felt it herself. Burning things down is easy, she said. Building something better is hard. Do both if you must. Resist and build. Destroy what's unjust and create what's just. But don't forget the building part. As Eliza entered her 50s, her health began to decline. The hard years of slavery, the stress of escape, the weight of carrying terrible secrets, it all took its toll. But she kept working until she couldn't anymore. In 1890, at age 56, Eliza Morrison collapsed while teaching a class. She was bedridden for the last 3 months of her life. Friends and former students came to visit. The women she had taught, the communities she had helped, the lives she had touched, they all came to say goodbye. Ruth's granddaughter Sarah came. "You saved my community," she said. "We would have been destroyed without what you taught us." "You saved yourselves," Eliza replied weakly. "I just gave you tools." Her daughter Anna, now 17, sat beside her bed. "Mama, what do you want me to remember about you?" Eliza thought about everything she had done. The good and the terrible, the brave and the desperate, the victories and the compromises. "Remember that I loved you," she said. "Remember that I fought for freedom, even when the fight was ugly. And remember that the struggle doesn't end with one generation. You'll have to keep fighting in your own way for your own time." "I will, Mama." Eliza died on a cold February morning, surrounded by family and friends. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, former slaves she had taught to read, women she had helped escape abusive situations, activists she had trained, children she had educated. No one mentioned the Blackwoods. No one spoke of poison or murder or revenge. They talked about her kindness, her wisdom, her tireless work for her community. They talked about her as a hero. But Eliza knew the truth was more complicated. She had been a hero to some, a killer to others. She had saved lives and taken them. She had been both victim and perpetrator, powerless and powerful. In the years after her death, her story became part of the oral history of the Black community in Cincinnati. Mothers told daughters. Teachers told students. Each telling emphasized different aspects: her bravery, her intelligence, her refusal to accept oppression. The part about poisoning the Blackwood family was whispered, not shouted. Some versions left it out entirely. Others framed it as righteous justice. A few questioned whether it was true at all or just a legend. But the women who had sought her out for dangerous knowledge knew the truth, and they passed it on, carefully, to those who needed it. Because the world Eliza had fought against didn't die with her. Jim Crow lasted another 70 years. Racial violence continued. The struggle for equality went on. And in that ongoing struggle, some people needed what Eliza had offered: the knowledge that they weren't powerless, that they could fight back, that those who hurt them could be hurt in return. It wasn't always right. It wasn't always just, but it was real power in a world that tried to strip power from the oppressed. Eliza's daughter Anna grew up to become a teacher and organizer. She never killed anyone, never used the dangerous knowledge her mother had possessed. But she used other tools: education, organization, political action, to fight the same battles her mother had fought. And she made sure her own children knew their grandmother's full story. Not sanitized, not simplified, but real and complicated and human. "Your great-grandmother did terrible things," she told them. "She took lives, but she did it to survive, to protect herself and others in a world that gave her no other options. Don't judge her too harshly, but don't follow her path blindly either. Find your own way to fight injustice." The legacy of Eliza Morrison spread in ways she never could have predicted. The mutual aid society she started still existed a century later. The library she founded became a major repository of Black history. The women she taught went on to teach others, creating networks of resistance that outlived slavery and Jim Crow. And somewhere in the archives, in a box of letters and documents, was a journal Eliza had kept in her final years. In it, she had written, "I killed 4 people to be free. I would do it again. But I hope my daughter never has to make that choice. I hope the world she inherits is one where such desperate acts aren't necessary. We who were enslaved, we who were raped and beaten and treated as property, we had to become hard to survive. We had to do terrible things. That's not our shame. It's the shame of those who created a system so cruel that survival required us to become killers. I don't know if history will remember me kindly. I don't know if I deserve to be remembered at all, but I lived. I survived. I fought back. I refused to die quietly. And in a world that tried to erase me, that might be victory enough. The mystery was how a powerless slave girl could destroy a wealthy family. The answer was, she found power where she could, used it without hesitation, and refused to accept the role they tried to force on her. The story ends not with a moral lesson, but with a truth. Sometimes survival requires becoming something you never wanted to be. Sometimes justice comes through unjust means. Sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become something else entirely. Eliza Morrison, born Eliza Nobody Knows, forced to become Eliza Blackwood, finally free as Eliza Morrison. She chose survival over submission. She chose action over acceptance. She chose her own life over the lives of those who would have destroyed her. History doesn't record whether that makes her a hero or a villain, but it records that she lived free. And in 1856, for a black woman born into slavery, that was the most revolutionary act of all. The end. This story is a work of fiction inspired by the resistance of enslaved people throughout American history. While Eliza's story is invented, it represents the real choices faced by people with no legal recourse, no protection, and no hope except their own courage and determination. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not sanitized, but in all their complicated, difficult truth.